Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with you all on a sunny July day. We've been having quite the weather lately, so it's great to be here on a sunny day. I want to thank you all for stopping by our office to hear about what our next steps are regarding our audit of the legislature. As you know, in March, I announced that our office was conducting an audit of the Massachusetts Senate and House of Representatives. The audit includes budgetary, hiring, spending, and procurement information regarding active and pending legislation, the process for appointing committees, the adoption and suspension of legislative rules, and the policies and procedures of the legislature. The intent of our audit is to work alongside the legislature to help to increase accountability, transparency, and equity, and to help make government work better, which is our office's motto. Speaker Ron Mariano and Senate President Karen Spilka have unfortunately both refused to comply with our audit. Attached in the documents we're passing out today, and which we will make public to anyone wishing to view them, are letters sent to our office from these two legislators. Both legislators contend that an audit done by our office would somehow exceed the authority granted to the Office of the State Auditor under Mass General Law, Chapter 11, Section 12. They also argue that our audit somehow violates the separation of powers principles enunciated in Article 30 of the Declaration of Rights of the Massachusetts Constitution. So we have two legislators who were elected by a very small fraction of the state, twisting and weaponizing both Massachusetts general law and the Constitution against the people of the entire state of Massachusetts to try and shield themselves from basic public accountability that is supported by law, the Constitution, and undeniable historical precedent. It's completely unacceptable, and the people's rights guaranteed to them in the Constitution must not continue to be violated. Today, we are announcing our pursuit of litigation, citing the following points. Point number one, the Office of the State Auditor has statutory authority to audit the legislature because the legislature is a department of the Commonwealth. Our office is governed by Mass General Law, Chapter 11, Section 12, which grants the state auditor authority to audit the accounts, programs, activities, and functions of all departments, offices, commissions, institutions, and activities of the Commonwealth. There is clear evidence to support the legislature being considered a department. Its legislative and budgetary activities being considered activities, and its functions being considered functions. In fact, Article 30 of the Declaration of Rights of the Massachusetts Constitution clearly indicates that the legislature is a department of the Commonwealth. Elsewhere, the Massachusetts Constitution consistently refers to the legislature as a, you guessed it, department of the Commonwealth. For example, Part 2, Chapter 1, Section 1, Article 1, which is titled Legislative Department, states, the Department of Legislation shall be informed by two branches, a Senate and House of Representatives, each of which shall have a negative on the other. The legislative body shall assemble every year and shall be styled the General Court of Massachusetts. It's clear that the framers of the Massachusetts Constitution consider the legislature to be a department of the Commonwealth. For more than a century, the Supreme Judicial Court has referred to the legislature as a department. In opinion after opinion regarding solemn occasions, which is where the Supreme Judicial Court interprets the constitutional and statutory power and authority of the governor and the legislature, the court regularly refers to the legislature as a department of the Commonwealth. Such a reading of department is also consistent with how the term is used throughout Massachusetts statutes. For example, Mass General Law, Chapter 29, Section 711 states that expenses of the Commonwealth shall include expenses of the executive, legislative, and judicial departments. Additionally, Mass General Law, Chapter 11, Section 12 does not, by its plain language, exempt the Senate, House of Representatives, or any other legislative entity from the scope of the Office of the State Auditor's oversight authority. one former Attorney General has recognized that any institution, activity, or department of the Commonwealth that is not expressly exempted from Mass General Law, Chapter 11, Section 12, is subject to the Office of the State Auditor's oversight. Specifically in a letter to State Auditor Francis X. Hurley, dated March 4th, 1931, Attorney General Joseph E. Warner wrote, "The plain meaning of Section 12 is that the Department of the Auditor of the Commonwealth shall make a careful audit of all departments, offices, commissions, institutions, and activities of the Commonwealth, except such as are expressly exempted in the statute." The notable absence of an explicit exclusion related to the legislative department from the plain language of Mass General Law, Chapter 12, Section 11, is a clear indication that the intent of the legislature was to include and not exclude the legislative department among the entities that the Office of the State Auditor has authority to audit. Point number 2, there is undeniable historical practice of the Office of the State Auditor auditing both the legislature and the judiciary since its inception in 1849. More recently, while some elected state auditors have chosen not to audit the legislature, our research has revealed that there is indeed a well-established historical practice of doing so. To date, our office has actually found, as you see around me, 113 audits of the Massachusetts legislature that have been done by this office. These audits you see before you provide irrefutable and clear evidence that our office has repeatedly and regularly audited the state legislature throughout its history. These audits span over 150 years, with the most recent audit of the legislature issued in 2006. The Office of the State Auditor's first annual report, published in 1850, audited the legislative department's accounts, books, and activities, not only of 1849, but also of the previous nearly 2 decades looking back to 1831. Point number 3, legislative audits are contemplated by the Massachusetts Constitution. Legislative leaders argue that our audit of the legislature, again, would somehow violate the Massachusetts Constitution, with the speaker saying that an audit would claim authority, quote, over the people themselves, end quote. This assertion is woefully mistaken. An audit of the legislature reflects the will of the people. It does not circumvent it. The state auditor is a constitutional officer who is directly elected by and thus ultimately responsible and accountable to the people of the Commonwealth. When the Massachusetts Constitution was adopted in 1780, the position of state auditor didn't exist. Rather, in 1849, the legislature created the position through statute, under which the auditor was to be appointed by the legislature. However, the state auditor was later elevated to the constitutional status, along with the Attorney General, the Secretary of the Commonwealth, and the Treasurer, when the Massachusetts Constitution was amended in 1855. During the debates of the Constitutional Convention of 1853, the drafters recognized, quote, the office of Auditor of Accounts as an office of great importance, end quote, and that, quote, an officer of this character vested with the powers with which that officer is vested could better discharge those duties than they could be discharged by a committee of the legislature or by any other officer, end quote. The drafters also acknowledged that as a constitutional officer, the state auditor should be directly elected by the people rather than be appointed by the legislature or by any supreme executive magistrate, and that under the theory of our government, quote, the supreme power is with the people. Following these debates, Massachusetts voters amended the Constitution to declare the state auditor to be a constitutional officer directly elected by the people rather than appointed by the governor or legislature. As a result, the state auditor is accountable directly and independently to the people of the Commonwealth who hold supreme power. Therefore, this attempt by the House Speaker and Senate President to block or stymie an audit conducted on behalf of the people of Massachusetts by their duly elected constitutional officer is a direct affront to the Constitution, which clearly states that they are at all times accountable to the people. Point number 4. Public policy considerations favor an audit of the legislature. The Massachusetts legislature is widely considered to be one of the least transparent state legislatures in the country. Indeed, a recent article gave the Massachusetts legislature the shameful ranking as arguably the least transparent state legislative body in the country. In 2013, the Sunlight Foundation conducted a nationwide study of the accessibility of each state's legislative data. It gave Massachusetts a grade of F. In 2015, the Center for Public Integrity gave Massachusetts a grade of D+ in its state integrity investigation, which measured hundreds of variables to compile transparency and accountability grades for all 50 states. And in 2019, the Pioneer Institute ranked Massachusetts 47 out of 50 states in a study of financial disclosure requirements for elected officials across the nation. Local and national media also frequently comment on the legislature's lack of transparency. For example, in 2021, the Boston Globe, who is here today, discussed the Massachusetts legislature's, quote, culture of secrecy, end quote, at length, writing, "For years, voters have been left to wonder why some popular common sense proposals don't pass in the Massachusetts House, even when a majority of the chamber's members sign on publicly in support. That's because the vast majority of the bills never get a formal vote. Instead, they die in the obscure committee process where voters can't see who killed them." Massachusetts voters agree that this is a problem. In 2020, voters in 16 House districts overwhelmingly supported ballot measures aimed at increasing transparency in the House committee process by requiring the House to make the results of all votes in its legislative committees publicly available on its website. They were joined by roughly 20 activist groups, including Act on Mass, the Sunrise Movement, Nahente Boston, the Boston Indivisible Progressive Action Group, and Our Climate Boston, who organized a campaign pushing for reform of the state's legislative rules. However, when that initiative came before the House members overwhelmingly rejected a transparency amendment that would have forced them to post online their votes on bills and committees, publicize the testimony that influences those votes, and when requested, and required a 1-week notice in the scheduling of committee hearings. If the people are to be the supreme authority over the Commonwealth, then transparency and accountability must be of paramount importance. Without them, the people cannot be informed and have no way to exercise their supreme authority in an informed, responsible manner that truly reflects the will of the people. A lack of transparency to the people renders ineffective their ability to execute their authority under our Constitution and form of government. Knowledge is power, and power belongs to the people. Point number 5. The legislature themselves exercise audit and oversight authority over the executive and judicial departments. While legislative leaders have argued that the Office of the State Auditor cannot audit the legislative department because doing so would supposedly violate separation of powers principles, they have yet to explain how the legislature is then able to audit and provide oversight of the executive and judiciary without violating the same principles they claim exempts them from accountability in a system of checks and balances. The legislature itself even appoints, quote, legislative auditors, end quote, and several committees have a history of practicing oversight of executive and judicial departments of the government. In fact, the House and Senate committees on post-audit and oversight, established under Mass General Law, Chapter 3, Section 63, have as their established purpose the duty to oversee the development and implementation of legislative auditing programs to be conducted by the bureaus with special emphasis on performance auditing. Such power includes the power to summon witnesses, administer oaths, take testimony, and compel the production of books, papers, documents, and other evidence in connection with any authorized examination and review. If the committees shall deem special studies or investigations to be necessary, they may direct their legislative auditors to undertake such studies or investigations. Likewise, the Joint Committee on State Administration and Regulatory Oversight names among its responsibilities the consideration of all matters concerning competitive bidding on public contracts, public instruction, open meeting laws, state regulations, state agencies, lobbyists' reporting laws, and such other matters as may be referred, thus encompassing all departments of government. Other committees provide direct oversight of executive department entities. The Joint Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities claims responsibility to oversee the Department of Children and Families, Developmental Services, Transitional Assistance, Youth Services, the Massachusetts Commissions for the Blind, the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission. Similarly, the Joint Committee on Environment and Natural Resources includes among its charges the responsibility to consider all matters concerning the division of conservation and recreation, natural resources, and the environment. The Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use, and Recovery asserts responsibility for the oversight of the Department of Mental Health and the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services. The Joint Committee on Public Services duties encompass the consideration of all matters concerning the salaries, civil service, and retirement of public employees, including the retirement of judges, court personnel, and county employees, but excluding the salaries of said judges, court personnel, and county employees. This committee's extensive oversight authority extends not just to the executive department, but also reaches the judiciary. These long-standing practices have not yet given rise to a separation of powers objection, even though the legislative department also controls the budgets of the executive and judicial departments. Yet, when our office seeks only to exercise its authority to provide oversight of the legislative department without the budgetary powers that the legislature exercises over the executive and judiciary, legislative leaders take issue. These arguments against transparency and accountability are nothing short of ridiculous. Audits by our office are considered matters of routine by every other state entity where our team works alongside workers across our state to help to identify potential areas of waste, fraud, and abuse, and to assist, again, in making government work better, as is our mission. The Office of the State Auditor is authorized by the statute's clear language, historical precedent, and informed analysis of constitutional separation of powers doctrine, and it is critical that this authority be recognized by litigation if necessary. Our office urges the Office of the Attorney General to support our effort, an effort backed not only by the Constitution and laws of the Commonwealth, but also the will of Massachusetts voters. to increase transparency, accountability, and equity throughout state government, including the legislature. Our office is here to provide the service of shining light in the dark areas of state government so that we can all do better. As a former self-employed house cleaner, I learned that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and it is beyond past time that Beacon Hill's dirty windows get opened and cleaned to let that sunlight in. Thank you very much. I will open it up to questions.
Have you talked with the Attorney General yet? Because it seems the Attorney General would have to sign off on this.
Thank you, Charmin. I did speak with the Attorney General. We actually spoke this morning. I informed her that we were going to be sending over this legal memo today. I believe we sent the legal memo over just as we were coming into this press conference today. So the Office of Attorney General should have been receiving a legal memo at the same time that most of you received the legal memo.
And so you hope, has she given any indication either way, whether or not she'll
She has indicated that she is certainly going to be reviewing these matters as soon as possible, and she looked forward at that time to receiving a legal memo. And certainly we do want to give our Attorney General the opportunity to read and reflect on the very lengthy legal memo that we did just send over to her office, alongside of the list of the 113 audits that we have recently discovered. We want to make sure that their office has access to these audits as well. And just as further information for everyone, we are working to digitize these documents. It's taking some time. We want to make sure you know that these are all available to you upon request. We wanted you to be able to come into the office. I considered simply sending out a press release to everybody today about this with a legal memo, but I wanted you to have access to the books themselves so that you can thumb through the audits yourself, take photos, do whatever you like with that, and we're happy to try to get copies or scanned documents upon request until we're able to digitize all of the documents for everyone.
Madam, could you just lay out what are the next steps here? I guess is if you get, I guess, would you call it clearance from the AG to proceed, or then if she decides not to, what's the next step after that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. As a non-attorney, I've been consulting with our general counsel, who I want to thank for his participation in this process, alongside of all of our staff who did a lot of work in finding all of these audits and putting this together today to make sure all this information is readily accessible. Right now, I'm following the guidance of our general counsel, which says that we are to work with the Attorney General's office by first submitting a legal memo outlining what our reasons are for seeking litigation. So we are doing so with this legal memo, and we do look forward to hearing back from the Attorney General, hopefully after she has a chance to review these documents with her support to proceed.
And if she does not give you support to proceed?
We will cross that bridge when we get to it.
What do you want to define with an audit if it does go ahead?
Well, we talked about budgetary, hiring, procurement practices, spending practices, committee practices, and we did outline that in the letter that we sent to the legislature. It's less about trying to find something and more about making sure that our office is working alongside of the legislature to help to increase transparency, accountability, and equity by making sure that we are available to analyze documents, analyze processes, which we would consider to be activities, analyze the functions of the legislature, which is part of our enabling statute, to identify any potential areas of waste, fraud, and abuse, and to identify ways to help the Massachusetts legislature be more transparent and accountable to the people it serves.
Is there some kind of court order to force the hand of the legislature to, agree to this audit?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
I said, are you trying to go to court to have the court sort of try to force the hand of the legislature to cooperate with the audit?
Yes, we are seeking to have this conversation in court by submitting a legal memo to the Attorney General's office.
Is there any concern about the separation of powers issue with the court trying to order the legislature to do something?
As we've outlined in the document and in the legal memo, we are of the firm belief that separation of powers doctrine does not prohibit our office from doing our jobs and conducting an audit of the Massachusetts legislature, which has been done 113 other times at least.
Madam Auditor, have you talked to the legislative leaders, the Speaker, the Senate President, let them know this is coming?
I have not. We have simply been requesting information from the legislature and our office has been stonewalled. We did let them know that we were conducting the audit. We have repeatedly requested from their offices cooperation. So while I have not had the opportunity to discuss this with them directly or in person in recent days, this has been an ongoing discussion since March between our offices on the matter.
But the legal memo, they haven't been advised that this is.
The legal memo, the general public is getting this legal memo alongside the Attorney General's office right now, and we're making it available to the general public as we speak.
Is there a
Legislative-
deadline by which the Attorney General has to respond to your memo to tell you whether to be received?
I would have to consult with our general counsel. I'm not sure about that, Lisa, but we can get that information for you.
Legislative leaders have been critical of your, perhaps before this, certainly and now, willingness to use taxpayer dollars to go ahead and pursue an audit. What would be your response to that?
We are right now working with our general counsel and staff that we already have on staff, who is simply helping to conduct an audit that is under the purview of our office to conduct. We have not hired outside counsel. We are soliciting the support of the Attorney General in this matter. We do not wish to go to court. We have repeatedly offered to have conversations, requested compliance with this audit, requested that the legislature see the value and opportunity in working alongside of our office to help increase access for the voters we all serve to what's happening behind the closed doors in the State House. And unfortunately, those requests to work alongside of our office have been dismissed, ignored at times, and essentially rejected. So it is incredibly unfortunate that we are at the place where we need to pursue legal action of any kind. It was my hope that legislative leaders would see the value in this opportunity. Unfortunately, they haven't, so we are pursuing legal action in this way. But we have not hired outside counsel, and we are working with our general counsel and staff right now.
If you do have the report, I guess just to clarify, what SJC and who would you ask to represent you? In-house counsel? Would you ask the AG?
Right now, we're asking the AG to support our efforts and to represent us, certainly. And we are currently represented by our general counsel.
Would they have a commitment to also represent the legislature as well? Because they're prosecuting the state. Like, how does that?
That's a great question. I think it's one better suited for the Attorney General's office. Again, not being an attorney, I don't want to mistakenly say something that's incorrect on that front.
But doesn't that make this just like complicated, like very complicated?
Some may view it that way. For us, it's crystal clear that we have the authority to audit the legislature. We have historical precedent of 113 audits that we found, and we're simply asking the Attorney General to recognize these audits, the historical precedent, the clear language of the statute that we're governed by, and the Massachusetts Constitution, and support our efforts to increase transparency, accountability, and equity. And I think, your question goes to another question that was asked somewhat, so we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Right now, we're looking to work together with the AG. We're hoping legislative leaders will come around before we even need to continue to move forward with this, but these are the actions we're taking right now to make sure that we're able to do our jobs.
Could I ask,
Sure.
I've seen some of the old audits, and they're very financial focused, sort of how they spending money and that sort of thing. And many of your audits are focused on financial issues. But a lot of what you're talking about are sort of the way, the style of legislative leadership runs the place, transparency and things like that. Do your audits normally go into that territory about how you don't like their style, for example? Is that what audits should be focused on?
So our office follows the government accountability office's standards. That it's a federal organization that essentially wrote the book on auditing, and our office follows industry standards that are handed down to us by the feds. We operate in a function that performs. We do performance audits. That's what our office does. So we're able to do financial audits, but our office does what's called performance audits. To the point of the early audits focusing on finances, absolutely, certainly that was the case, and that was the case for every department. and entity and activity that was actually audited by the auditor's office back then. There are annual reports that go through all of the different entities of state government, and it is largely back then, it seems to me that it was financial in nature only at the beginning when the office was first created. As industry standards changed and government got bigger and the office was able to conduct performance audits, as I highlighted, the legislature conducts performance audits of the executive branch. It's actually spelled out. The office started doing more performance-based audits where the auditor was able to exercise independent judgment about what to audit in a given year and focused on areas that were deemed to be potentially problematic. For example, in one of the audits that's here today, there was an issue where a court officer was allegedly receiving fraudulent payments. Great if there's an accounting of the fact that people are receiving paychecks, but that doesn't answer questions regarding waste, fraud, and abuse. So the state auditor at the time went in, conducted an audit of the situation, looked at the processes and procedures, and found that the allegations of fraudulent payments to this court officer were indeed fraudulent. The issue was then able to be resolved after that audit was conducted by the state auditor, and audits continued.
When's the last time? What's the most recent audit?
2006.
What is the oldest one?
So there was an issued audit in 1950. That's the earliest one that we have. But that audit covered the periods dating back to 1931.
Just want to correct you.
Yes.
1850 and the first audit was issued in 1850.
What did I say, 1950? Thank you, yes,
1850.
1850, thanks. Thank you, Michael.
And then dated back to 1831.
31.
Great. Auditor, could you just clarify one more sort of procedural thing? I might have mentioned this, but why is this a request to the AG rather than just filing a lawsuit against the legislature?
We're following the law.
So you're required to ask the AG if you can take this to court? Basically?
Yes, and Michael, I'm, okay,
Yeah,
I'm going to explain this, yes.
By statute, the Attorney General's office represents the Commonwealth, including the state auditor's office in all court matters. So we're following the process. This is the first step.
Madam Auditor, you're someone who served in both the House and Senate. How do you think that personal experience influences your push to audit both branches? And some critics might say that it looks like you're doing this for personal reasons. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I find it unfortunate that anyone would personalize any effort to increase transparency, accountability, and equity in a legislature that is frequently ranked as the least transparent legislature in the entire nation. Certainly, this is something that I believe we all share in common, those of us who have served in the legislature and those of us who haven't served in the legislature. People are tired of the games. They're tired of waiting on budgets well beyond the time that they're supposed to be reported out. Cities and towns are struggling right now, waiting for the legislature to get it together. We see right now legislative committees fighting with each other, the Senate and the House not speaking at times, bills being sent around to different committees, accusations occurring between the two legislative entities of the Senate and the House of Representatives. Folks are fed up, they're tired. They want access, they want to know that their officials are not playing games with their taxpayer dollars. They want to know that they can trust their elected officials. And it's nearly impossible to be able to trust elected officials with the tax dollars that you're giving to the government if those elected officials will not give access to basic information about how those tax dollars are being spent, especially when it's being requested by folks who are trying to help to increase transparency, accountability, and equity. You would think that this was an FBI investigation. We are not the FBI in this office. I'm an elected state auditor, I'm an elected official. The great people that work in our office are doing nothing more than trying to do their jobs. And it's unfortunate that in a state such as Massachusetts, for as forward-thinking as we are, that our legislature is the only state entity that's refusing to cooperate with our office's audit. Any other questions? I'll be available on my cell phone after this if y'all need me. If you have nothing further. Okay, I'm gonna leave these here, and if anybody would like to look at them or to ask for copies of them, like I said, our office is working really hard to try to digitize them, but there are a lot. We're happy to get them out to you upon request, and we're gonna be compiling them and making them readily accessible.
You have a copy of the
to
memo?
general public. Yep, the memo should be, yes, so the memo's actually here if you don't want to pick it up on your way out, or just right now, it's fine. Most of my remarks were taken from the legal memo as well, so you should have that in writing to make things easier for the reporters here. We're looking to make that a little bit easier, and feel free to ask for further information if you need it.
Is the 2006 audit up there?
It should be, yes. And Tyler, actually, can we just, I'm not gonna ask for all to give a round of applause to my staff, but I do just need to thank them because they did tremendous work. Tyler, Lauren, Michael, Steve, my executive deputy, Stephanie Neal Johnson, our chief of staff, who unfortunately couldn't be here with us today, and all of our assistants in his office have done a tremendous job in really digging to find this information and to compile this all for us to have today. So I do want to make sure that I thank them for that today, and they'll be happy to help to assist in finding whatever you need here. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you.